Okay, the Assembly will hear an address by Carlos Alvarado Quesada, President of the Republic of Costa Rica. I request protocol to escort His Excellency on behalf of the General... Escorting. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations Carlos Alvarado Quesada, President of the Republic of Costa Rica, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señora Presidenta,
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, ladies and gentlemen. A mayor of Colonia in Germany, a young leader, young for his time, he was 41 years old, argued that peace in Europe depended on the relationship between Germany and France. He said that it would only through developing strong political and economic ties between the two countries to unite the interests of the two countries that it will be possible to have peace in Europe. Today, nobody would be surprised by this hypothesis. But what's exceptional is that that young mayor, Konrad Adenauer, was promoting that idea 100 years ago in the 1920s. From his position as a mayor, he said this in seeking better ties between countries around the Rhine basin. This idea did not flourish at the time, and even less during the Second World War. Events we're all familiar with, and which led to the enactment of the Universal Human Rights Declaration and the creation of this formidable and fabulous body, which is the United Nations, from where I have the honor of speaking today. Similar to other visionary leaders in Central America, a process was put in motion in 1960 to create the Central American Common Market. This is the oldest integration process of the continent that drove development in Central America in a joint effort in order to improve the living conditions of our inhabitants. In my Costa Rica, the leaders before me also were ahead of their time. Already in the second part of the 19th century, they declared compulsory and free education for all boys and girls. And in 1941, we laid the foundation for universal Social Security. 70 years ago, we abolished the army, and we declared perpetual peace with the rest of the world. At the time, it was said that it would be impossible for a country to survive without a military. And yet, here I am, 70 years later, as proof of the contrary. In 1981, we offered the University of Peace to the world. And all of this is possible only in a multilateral world, a world that fights for peace, that fights for international law and for human rights. Also, ideas were ahead of history on our continent with the adoption of the American Convention on Human Rights, or the San Jose Covenant, and with the creation of the Inter-American Court and Commission on Human Rights. Would it have been possible to be ahead of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or to be ahead of the creation of the United Nations or the implementation of the Marshall Plan, to be ahead of the Alliance for Progress, ahead of decolonization or the Treaty on the Banning of Nuclear Weapons as proactive action to build a better world? Or was it inevitable that these actions be in response to prevent future wars and other global threats. Would it have been possible to avoid so much pain and loss? Ideas can be ahead of history. Rather than wait, we should seize the initiative to drive forward peace projects, joint projects for peace and progress for mankind as a route of multilateral construction of a better world and a better future for all. The freedom of the human spirit compels us. We are not condemned to just act in a reactionary manner after the outbreak of painful events, events that we know can or may happen. That is our responsibility. Anticipate the direction in which history is leading us and seize opportunities without having to wait for another economic crisis, an environmental crisis, or a war to serve as a leverage to compel us to adopt the necessary changes. Modern thinkers such as Rob Ryman, Yuval Noah Harari, Joseph Stiglitz, and others, these thinkers all agree that today there are parallels with the world of the 1930s and the last century. Despair, frustration, resentment, the lack of a feeling of belonging, all of this are the seeds to grow regimes that stomp on the rights of people and create a war in the name of perverse ideals and spurious ideas. It is a time of profound transformation that oblige us to think about the foundation of the social contract, this simple speech and rhetoric of the isms, which is being echoed and penetrating in societies from within, accumulates popular support in democratic systems. And we cannot then respond as flexibly as we need to, and with concrete ideas respond to inequality and a lack of opportunity. We, in addition to not repeating past errors, need to shoulder and arm ourselves with courage and anticipate history. In our discussion of yesterday, during the Summit on Climate Action, we reviewed the urgent need to put in place global mechanisms to grapple with current challenges, and we analyzed the positive results that have been yielded where ideas that were ahead of history were used. Consequent with our history, Costa Rica supports and backs multilateralism in order to grapple with common threats and to build a joint future for the whole planet. Proposing and fighting for multilateral solutions to common global causes doesn't mean that we have to agree on each and every detail. We must do so while respecting difference, through dialogue, through comprehension that the shared goal is much more important than specific discrepancies. We are capable of finding an agreement in order to articulate and coordinate our action around a common cause. And this was what was achieved in the foundational charter of the United Nations and in the Sustainable Development Goals that were defined. And it is what was achieved in the Paris Agreement. No house is more shared than the planet in which we inhabit. No cause is more global or worldwide than combating the global climate crisis. No one is spared the effects of climate change, and no one's contribution is too small, because it's only the summation of the actions of all countries and people that we will be able to grapple with this challenge. We are honored that the international community conferred upon Costa Rica the responsibility of organizing pre-COP25, which we will be hosting in October, in preparing the COP25 that is to be held in the sister nation of Chile in December. Commitments need to be clear, concrete, and resounding. We are decided to fulfill our role, and thus Costa Rica launched last February the National Plan for Decarbonization to achieve by 2050 an economy that would be free of the use of fossil fuels, an economy that would be modern, green, digital, resilient, and inclusive, in keeping with our ambitious environmental vocation as reflected in our focus, which has characterized our country. In the same way, we have shown that it is possible to have 99% of electric energy be clean and renewable, and that it is possible to reverse the process of deforestation, where we went from a coverage of 20% in the 1980s to more than 50% of forestry coverage. And today, in the same way, we're working towards the goal of decarbonization, conservation of biodiversity, and implementation of nature-based solutions. Young people and the multitudes who week after week demonstrated in so many countries are demanding this and more from us. The effect of climate change, inequality, poverty, and in many cases violence creates migratory flows, and millions of people around the world suffer from this phenomenon, and it is a challenge for the international community as a whole. From the point of view of human rights, we must develop sophisticated and joint responses. Central American migration could be stopped if economic and social development were brought to the rural areas of our countries, which is where most of these people are fleeing to migrate. The best investment in migration is to have good international markets, markets that are fair and well paid for agricultural and fishing products that are produced in the rural Central American area. And in that way, we can bring well-being to these zones. It's possible to do this with the effort of many countries and many parties in the area of good and fair market prices, technology, value added, and cooperation. That is the best and most humane solution to the drama of migration for economic reasons. The African proverb says that when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. In our time, we could say, we all suffer. Mankind has already gone through bipolarity, and we already know what we've inherited. The turbulences affecting the global economy harm economic growth, and especially economic growth in the most vulnerable countries are affected, where we see job opportunities disappear and entrepreneurship disappear along with production. In addition to the economic impact, this puts pressure on democratic institutions. Democracies are affected by restrictive contexts, austerity in order to maintain macroeconomic balances, but which also limit the possibility of reducing inequality and concentration of wealth. Less expenditure on weapons and accumulation, and more investment in the fight against poverty, inequality, and the climate crisis. That's the most intelligent way that the world could go today. Once again, let us get ahead of history. Additional pressure stems from the information society and digitalization. Participating in the fourth industrial revolution is not an option. We are obliged to think about the future of work, conceptualizing learning and sustainability of institutions and social protection based on jobs, as addressed by the International Labor Organization and the World Commission set to address this issue. The world cannot break up its cohesion, and it's imperative to close the gap between the excluded and the included in this world. Managing technological change to favor decent work and to close technological gaps and gender gaps will be key in order to get ahead of history and preserve the social and democratic fabric. A global initiative of inclusion and digital literacy, as well as inclusion without more, would be the most intelligent way to go for mankind. Not creating any more barriers due to difference, but rather feed a whole kaleidoscope of understanding and human enrichment based on our marvelous diversity. Just like any natural ecosystem, human diversity makes us complementary to each other and stronger. And cohesion lies in respect, understanding, and empathy between each other. We, The states that make up this organization, we have the tools to do it, and the young are demanding it of us. Democracy, peace, defending international law and human rights, and international humanitarian law are all facing challenges. In Nicaragua, we see a clear need to recover social peace. Costa Rica has denounced violence, a lack of respect, and ongoing permanent violation as a state policy, violation of human rights, especially for those who oppose the government. And this has dramatically increased the number of refugees that we're receiving from Nicaragua. It's imperative to hold national dialogue and to have an inclusive electoral process which is transparent and under international supervision. As a global community, we must seek peaceful solutions and expedited solutions to the grave political, humanitarian situation and the situation of violation of human rights in the prevailing regime of the sister nation of Venezuela. As confirmed by the report of the High Commissioner of the United Nations in the area of human rights and current violations of human rights. Also, it is necessary to put an end to the economic embargo on Cuba, the impact of which has been very harmful to its population. Further, it's necessary to undertake solidarity efforts to grapple with the political and social crisis in Haiti. In all of these cases, let us get ahead of history. Strengthening inclusion, and specifically gender equality, economic and political empowerment of women, and fighting all forms of discrimination, with an emphasis on the racial, religious nature, or sexual preference. All of this is vital in order to ensure the respect of human rights and sustainable development. Costa Rica has committed to making progress with rights of Afro-descendant persons who deal with clear conditions where they are at a disadvantage. Next October, we will be hosting the high-level meeting on accelerating global action for compliance of rights of Afro-descendant persons. The Vice President of Costa Rica, Epsi Campbell, the first Afro-descendant woman of the continent to occupy that post of Vice Presidency, is shouldering that responsibility on behalf of my government. In today's world, more than ever, people and leaders must be courageous in both heart and mind. Our responses must strengthen our institutions of well-being and peace, strengthen the free press, true information, security of private information, algorithms and protocols which are ethical, but especially we must improve the experience of life of all people, hopefully by promoting an illustrated spirit. Almost 50,000 years ago, there were paintings and drawings of the Sulawesi caves in Indonesia or the cave of El Castillo in Spain. These works of art show us that there's a common path for humanity. It's the same hands, the same species. The Egyptian pyramids, the Mayan pyramids, or the Diki spheres in my country are all evidence of civilizations that we built and that together are all a legacy of a single humanity. Our mission as leaders today is to get ahead of history, to learn, to not imitate Sisyphus. Getting ahead of history means having innovative and courageous proposals so that the day will come where, working together, we will overcome the challenges that threaten our planet, and one day we will be able to fulfill the intimate dreams such as those of the poet Jorge de Bravo when he described, "I ask for tenderness, dinner, silence, bread, home." Or the great dreams shared by those who unite us, such as the poem by the great Ray Bradbury of the United States when he wrote, and I quote, "I work for that, short man, large dream. I send my rockets forth between my ears, hoping an inch of good is worth a pound of years. Aching to hear a voice cry back during the Universal Mall, we've reached Alpha Centauri. We're tall. Oh God, we're tall. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Costa Rica for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the head of state.